Welcome to the debate. Imagine a factory floor in Shenzhen, China. 10 years ago, if you wanted to inspect circuit boards for microscopic flaws, it took 1,000 human eyes.
Right, just people standing there for 10 hours a day.
Exactly, staring at tiny solders. But today, a single camera lens powered by a neural network spots defects sub-millimeter deep without ever blinking, sleeping, or, asking for a raise.
Yeah, it is an engineering marvel.
It really is, but it begs a massive question. What happened to those 1,000 workers? Today, we are exploring a central issue drawn from recent global employment data, including comprehensive reports from the World Economic Forum, the International Labor Organization, and McKinsey.
That's right.
The core question is this: does global automation and artificial intelligence generate more jobs than it eliminates? And specifically, what is the impact on low-skilled workers in developing economies?
It is a vital question, and, well, one we really cannot afford to get wrong, because we are looking at the rapid replacement of repetitive jobs across almost every sector imaginable.
Definitely.
We are not just talking about heavy physical machinery anymore. We're talking about cognitive repetition, algorithms that process information, make decisions, and execute tasks are fundamentally reshaping workforces, from Brazilian auto plants to Indian call centers.
To frame our discussion today, I represent the perspective that automation, despite the obvious friction of transition, ultimately creates a net positive in global employment. I argue that it unlocks unprecedented economic abundance.
Okay.
Because while it is undeniably true that repetitive tasks are being eliminated, higher value jobs are created in their wake. The data bears this out. The World Economic Forum's 2024 report projects that while 85 million repetitive roles will be displaced globally, 97 million entirely new roles will be created to offset them.
Right, the 97 million number.
Yes. So I believe this technological shift elevates the global baseline of prosperity.
And I take the contrasting perspective that this sort of macroeconomic optimism obscures a much darker reality on the ground. I argue that AI structurally eliminates more jobs than it creates for the specific populations that need them most. The displaced, low-skilled workers in developing nations are being left behind entirely due to a massive skills gap and a profound lack of access to upskilling infrastructure. We are essentially engineering a future of extreme inequality.
Well, let's dig into the mechanisms of this. From my perspective, we really have to look at the sheer scale of productivity being unleashed. The democratization of technology drives unprecedented economic output.
Output for who, though?
For the global economy as a whole. If you look at PwC's 2025 AI Impact Index, we are seeing 15 to 25% productivity jumps across major industries. What we have to understand is that AI replaces the repetition, not the human value.
I hear you.
That World Economic Forum projection, the 85 million logistics and routine jobs displaced, but 97 million new roles created, it shows a transition toward oversight, strategy, and complex problem solving.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered the irony embedded right there in that statistic? You mentioned 97 million new roles, but what actually are those roles?
Well, they're across multiple new sectors.
Right, but they demand skills like AI oversight, systems architecture, prompt engineering, and, data governance. In other words, the new jobs require overseeing the very machines that took the old jobs.
Sure, the nature of work changes.
But the 85 million people losing their livelihoods do not possess those advanced skills.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. Historically, we've always seen this kind of transition. Think about the shift from a hand-drawn plow to a tractor.
Okay.
Yes, the tractor undeniably displaced the physical laborers who were literally pulling the plow through the mud, but it created an entirely new, higher-value ecosystem.
By displacing the workers?
Right, but you suddenly needed manufacturing, mechanics, logistics, and most importantly, it resulted in higher agricultural yields that elevated the broader economy and reduced the cost of food for everyone.
I come at it from a different way. Your tractor analogy is exactly where the traditional economic model breaks down, because the tractor replaced human muscle. We gave the farmer a better tool.
Exactly, a tool for efficiency.
But AI is replacing human memory and basic logic. We aren't just giving the farmer a better tool. We're giving the tool a brain, which means it doesn't even need the farmer to drive it anymore. And the bridge between those two realities is broken.
How so?
The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, tracks this exact data. Their numbers show that only 20% of displaced workers in developing economies actually have access to any kind of upskilling programs.
So you're pointing to an infrastructure issue.
Exactly. If you're listening to this and wondering why a displaced factory worker doesn't just, learn to code or become a data analyst, it's because the infrastructure simply does not exist for them. The International Labor Organization projects that between 75 and 375 million jobs will be transformed by 2030.
Right, transformed, not necessarily deleted.
But for a nation that relies heavily on a massive baseline of low-skilled labor, this transition is not a ramp to a better future. It is a cliff.
Wait, let me make sure I understand how you were defining this cliff. So if we take this from the broad macroeconomic data down to the dirt, literally, into the physical labor sectors like agriculture and manufacturing, are you saying that because the technology has a brain, the developing world is completely locked out of the next industrial era?
I am saying the sheer volume of low-skilled physical jobs vanishing is staggering. And there is absolutely no safety net. Let's look at the mechanics of manufacturing. Early industrial robots were blind and dumb.
They just repeated motions.
Right. They handled basic physical repetition, like welding a car frame in the exact same spot. But today, machines use computer vision and machine learning. They analyze the acoustic signature of a factory machine to hear a breakdown before it even happens.
Which is a massive efficiency gain.
It is. But in Brazil's automotive sector, the Volkswagen plant in São Bernardo do Campo integrated this kind of AI for predictive maintenance and assembly, which cuts repetitive inspection jobs by 25%. And going back to your Shenzhen example from earlier,
the circuit board inspection.
Yes, they're projecting over 500,000 industrial robots deployed by 2025. They're slashing labor costs by 40%.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because you were looking at the job displacement without considering the broader economic imperative of these technologies, particularly when we talk about keeping populations fed.
Meaning what?
Let's talk about agriculture, where this is literally a matter of survival. Automation here is absolutely essential for global food security. Look at Africa's emerging agri-tech sector. Apollo Agriculture in Kenya is deploying machine learning models that analyze satellite imagery.
But how does that actually impact the worker on the ground?
That's the crucial part. The AI reads the color spectrum of leaves from space to determine moisture levels and nitrogen deficiency. It does in seconds what used to take hundreds of farmers walking fields for weeks.
Which means those farmers aren't walking the fields anymore.
Yes, it reduces repetitive physical scouting jobs, but it drastically boosts yields because they know exactly when and where to apply fertilizer. Or look at Brazil's Mato Grosso soy fields. AI tractors from CNH Industrial are autonomously planting and harvesting by analyzing soil data in real time. This efficiency is what feeds the world.
The technology is brilliant. I readily grant you that. But look at the human cost of those boosted yields. Let's look at India's Punjab farmlands.
Okay.
Startups like Blue River Technology are using AI drones for what they call precision agriculture. The drone uses multispectral imaging. It doesn't just see a weed. It reads the infrared signature of the chlorophyll, deciding in a millisecond to drop a microdose of herbicide directly onto the weed.
That's incredibly precise.
It is, but it cuts manual weeding labor by 90%. The 2024 Food and Agriculture Organization report explicitly projects that precision agriculture could automate 40% of field labor in developing nations by 2030. What happens to that rural workforce?
Let me push back on that, because there is a harsh economic reality we really have to address. If developing nations artificially suppress automation to protect manual jobs, don't they risk total economic irrelevance in interconnected global supply chains?
I don't think it's about artificially suppressing.
But for instance, what happens to the 4 million seamstresses in Bangladesh? If Bangladesh refuses to adopt computer vision automated stitching to protect jobs, and Vietnam fully embraces it, the global capital simply moves to Vietnam.
That assumes capital movement is purely binary.
It largely is in garment manufacturing. Bangladesh doesn't save those jobs by resisting. They lose 100% of them instead of managing a transition for 60% of them.
That assumes a transition is even possible for them. The tragedy here is that we are forcing developing economies into a race to the bottom, where their only competitive advantage is being cheaper than a machine. And, well, that is a race human beings will eventually inevitably lose.
So, if a displaced farm worker in Punjab can no longer weed fields, or a garment worker in Bangladesh loses their factory job, the traditional economic safety valve has always been migrating to the city for entry-level service work, right? The white-collar desk job.
Precisely. That is the traditional ladder of development. But now, when they get to the city, they find out an algorithm is already sitting at that desk. We are seeing the rapid automation of cognitive repetition.
But cognitive...
The destruction of entry-level cognitive jobs is happening right now. And these were the exact jobs that traditionally lifted developing populations into the middle class.
But cognitive automation is exactly what frees up human capital. When you eliminate the tedium, societies pivot toward uniquely human value.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. Let's examine the mechanics of large language models and natural language processing. In the Philippines, the business process outsourcing sector, like call centers and data entry, has historically employed over 1.5 million people.
Yes, it's a massive industry there.
It was the absolute backbone of their emerging middle class. But today's AI chatbots from Google and Microsoft are not the old if-then decision trees we used to hate interacting with. They synthesize intent.
Right, they understand context now.
Exactly. They understand semantic meaning, instantly pull from vast knowledge bases, and resolve complex customer queries in seconds. They are now handling 70 to 80% of initial queries. According to McKinsey's 2023 analysis, this has already caused a 20 to 30% workforce reduction in these outsourcing hubs.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. We have to look at how that freed human capital is being redirected globally. In a high-skill, aging economy like Japan, AI handles the immense burden of nursing home data entry so that human carers can actually focus on empathy and direct patient interaction.
That's Japan, though. We are talking about developing economies.
True, but we see this innovation generating totally new industries in the global south as well. Consider Nigeria's Flutterwave. They use advanced AI for fraud detection.
But how many jobs does an algorithm really create locally?
A significant amount, actually. Because they aren't just buying off-the-shelf software. They built an entirely new local fintech ecosystem. The AI does the cognitive repetition, scanning millions of transactions instantly for anomalous patterns, which allows Nigerian engineers, product managers, and sales teams to build a global business.
For a select few with degrees, yes.
It generates highly skilled tech jobs in West Africa. Societies do adapt to this. India's National Education Policy of 2020 explicitly mandates coding and computational thinking in elementary schools, recognizing that the baseline of human labor has shifted.
A curriculum change for elementary students today does not put food on the table for the millions of adults losing their livelihoods right now. You mentioned India. Let's look at their IT services giants, companies like Infosys and Tata Consultancy Services.
The back office operations?
Right. They manage the back-end operations for Fortune 500 clients globally. Today, they deploy robotic process automation, or RPA bots. These bots flawlessly mimic human clicks and keystrokes across different software platforms to reconcile invoices or audit ledgers.
They're highly efficient for rule-based tasks.
Exactly. If an expense report over $500 lacks a receipt, the bot flags it. Because these jobs follow strict rules, AI executes billions of these decisions without error. They have automated roughly 30% of back-office tasks. We are talking about 2 to 3 million jobs affected in the subcontinent alone.
But consider the flip side of that technological infrastructure. What we are witnessing right now is the democratization of enterprise-grade technology. We have incredibly cheap cloud computing from providers like AWS and Alibaba.
Sure, infrastructure is cheaper.
Yes, and we have phenomenally powerful open-source AI models like Meta's Llama 3 or Mistral available for anyone to download. This drastically lowers the barrier to entry. 10 years ago, a small and medium-sized enterprise, an SME in Vietnam or Indonesia, needed a massive research and development budget to deploy AI.
Now, they just need an API key.
Today, they just need an internet connection.
They can utilize these models to scale their local businesses to compete on a global level. Isn't the democratization of the underlying technology offsetting the loss of outsourced labor by empowering local entrepreneurship?
It empowers the business owner in Vietnam. Yes, absolutely. But it does not empower the 5 data entry clerks that business owner just fired because Llama 3 can process their spreadsheets for fractions of a penny.
Well,
The fundamental dynamic we are seeing is that capital and technology are scaling beautifully, while the value of baseline human cognitive labor is plummeting towards zero.
having explored both the physical displacement in the fields and the cognitive displacement in the offices, we really need to examine the long-term horizon. What does the ultimate global endpoint look like for the working class as this transition matures?
It's a sobering question.
Because it might sound like we are just throwing massive numbers around, 85 million here, 300 million there, but think about what that means for a single local economy navigating the next 20 years.
I fundamentally reject the idea of a smooth, prosperous transition. We're looking at a horizon of aggressively widening structural inequality. The Goldman Sachs 2040 forecast projects that 300 million full-time jobs will be automated globally.
Mostly repetitive tasks, though.
But the vast majority, yes. Now, high-skill nations with massive capital reserves like South Korea or Germany have the resources to pivot faster. They can build the automated factories, capture the productivity gains, and retrain their smaller, highly educated populations.
Right.
But developing economies face massive, systemic displacement without the capital to support the displaced workers.
Wait, but don't you think policies like Universal Basic Income, UBI, can bridge that gap? If the AI generates massive wealth, the state taxes it and distributes it.
Universal basic income pilots, like the ones we've seen tested in Kenya or Finland, are fascinating sociological experiments. But they are just tests. They are nowhere near being massive, systemic macroeconomic solutions capable of supporting 300 million displaced global workers.
But the model is there.
A universal basic income requires a robust tax base. The developing world does not have the tax base to fund a UBI if their primary global export, which has historically been cheap human labor, is rendered completely obsolete by algorithms.
I see the risk there, but let me explain why I believe this abundance naturally redistributes itself even without perfect government intervention. History consistently shows us that radical technological efficiency ultimately unlocks broader global prosperity by fundamentally lowering the cost of essential services.
Lowering costs doesn't help if you have zero income.
Let's look at something universally critical: healthcare administration. Repetitive tasks like scheduling, medical coding, and record entry consume up to 25% of a hospital staff's time globally. Today, we have AI platforms from companies like Epic Systems using speech-to-text natural language processing.
Meaning the doctor just talks into a device?
Exactly. The AI listens to the patient consultation, understands the medical terminology, instantly transcribes the doctor's notes, formats them into a medical record, and verifies the insurance claims automatically.
Okay.
In the UK, this technology has streamlined operations across 1.3 million National Health Service employees.
Streamlining operations is often just a corporate euphemism for trimming administrative roles.
It is trimming roles that shouldn't require a human to act as a data conduit in the first place. And in doing so, it vastly expands human access to care. Look at Alibaba Health in China. They are using AI to automate patient triage.
Through an app?
Through a simple smartphone app, yes. The AI checks symptoms against a massive medical database. It is triaging 100 million users in rural areas who previously had zero access to a physician. The automation of these rule-bound domains lowers the fundamental cost of living.
But again, it's
Generative AI and machine learning will optimize global logistics, energy distribution, and medical research to a degree that creates a baseline of global prosperity. The transition is highly disruptive, I won't deny that, but the endpoint is a world where basic human needs are met with a fraction of the historical resource cost.
A fraction of the resource cost, perhaps, but those resources and algorithms remain concentrated in the hands of the corporations that own them. If Alibaba Health is triaging 100 million patients, that is a marvel of software engineering. It is incredible.
Yes, it is.
But it does not put a paycheck in the pocket of the displaced rural worker who still needs to buy food and pay rent in an economy that no longer requires their physical or cognitive labor.
You can't pay for groceries with a free medical diagnosis app.
As we synthesize our positions, I look at the convergence of these technologies, the abundance of data coming from connected devices, cheap cloud computing, and open-source models, and I see an unavoidable, yet ultimately net positive evolution.
We certainly see the data differently.
The World Economic Forum's calculus of 97 million new roles against 85 million lost is not just a mathematical balancing act. It represents a qualitative upgrade in human endeavor. From precision agriculture, utilizing satellites in Kenya, to AI-driven healthcare delivery in rural China, AI's conquest of repetitive tasks unlocks immense global productivity and innovation.
At a steep price.
The repetitive tasks vanish, yes, but the human capacity for strategy, empathy, and oversight finally takes center stage.
And my summation remains fiercely focused on the reality on the ground, where those aggregate global numbers obscure a dire and immediate crisis for low-skilled workers. Millions of roles, from weeding soybean fields in India with multispectral drones to answering basic customer service calls in the Philippines via natural language processing, are evaporating.
Right.
The structural reality is that the developing world lacks the upskilling infrastructure to catch these workers. A 20% retraining access rate is a catastrophic failure of global policy. Without massive intervention, we are not building a utopia of free time. We are engineering a future of deeply entrenched inequality where the majority of the globe is simply left behind.
I think we both clearly acknowledge that this transition is irreversible. We are in agreement that artificial intelligence fundamentally and permanently disrupts rule-bound, repetitive domains, whether physical or cognitive.
Yes, the technological genie is out of the bottle. The mechanics of neural networks and machine learning are simply too efficient, too fast, and too cheap for any global supply chain to ignore.
Absolutely.
Where we deeply fundamentally disagree is whether global societies can equitably redistribute the economic gains of this technology fast enough to prevent a catastrophic widening of global inequality.
Which highlights the absolute necessity of looking at this complex transition through both macroeconomic data and localized human perspectives. There is so much more to explore in the source material regarding specific government responses to this exact tension.
Like the regulatory frameworks?
Exactly. For instance, how the European Union's AI Act attempts to mandate transparency and protect workers, or how the U.S. CHIPS Act attempts to secure the physical hardware pipeline that actually drives these models.
Because ultimately, policy and human choices will dictate whether this technology serves humanity as a whole or subjugates its most vulnerable populations.
Indeed. At the beginning of our discussion, we pictured economic development as a ladder. If artificial intelligence is actively sawing off the bottom rungs of manual and routine cognitive labor, the global economy faces a profound choice.
A definitive crossroads.
We must ask whether this technology will ultimately serve as a bridge, elevating developing nations to unprecedented abundance, or an insurmountable barrier, leaving millions stranded at the bottom. We leave that for you to consider.